Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to dive into the top 10 countries where Americans might face some challenges when traveling into these places in 2024. Here at Andy Explores the World, we celebrate the spirit of adventure and the freedom to explore every corner of our planet. However, sometimes global politics and regional tensions can put a spanner in the works. So join us as we embark on a journey to those destinations that are known for their stringent entry requirements for US citizens. Now, let's dive into the facts of each country on our list of the top 10 challenging destinations for Americans in 2024. Starting at number 10, we have Venezuela. This South American beauty, with its breathtaking Andes mountains and inviting Caribbean shores, is sadly ensnared in a web of political and economic turmoil. The strained diplomatic relations between the United States and Venezuela, primarily due to ideological and political differences with leaders Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, have significantly impacted travel for Americans. These tensions have been exacerbated by the US imposing sanctions against the Venezuelan government, contributing to a frosty diplomatic atmosphere. Venezuela's severe economic crisis, marked by hyperinflation, shortages of essentials and collapsing public services, has led to widespread poverty, civil unrest, poor health infrastructure, and the potential for US citizens to be arbitrarily detained. Furthermore, obtaining a visa for entry into Venezuela has become increasingly complex for Americans due to the closure of Venezuelan consulates and the embassy in the US, forcing Americans to seek visas through Venezuelan embassies in third countries. This process is further complicated by the Venezuelan government's skepticism towards US travelers, which can make obtaining a visa a challenging and uncertain process. At number 9 is Libya, a country where conflict continues to deter tourists. American travelers face significant restrictions and safety concerns when considering travel to Libya, largely due to ongoing conflict and political instability in the country. The situation stems from the aftermath of the 2011 Libyan civil war and the subsequent breakdown of order, which has led to a fragmented state with multiple factions vying for control. This instability is compounded by the presence of terrorist groups and militias, making Libya a dangerous destination. The US Department of State strongly advises against travel to Libya for Americans, citing risks of crime, terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. Diplomatic relations between the United States and Libya have been tense, especially following the 2012 Benghazi attack that resulted in the death of the US ambassador and further strained bilateral relations. The process for Americans to obtain a tourist visa to Libya is complicated and in many cases practically impossible due to the lack of a functioning Libyan embassy in the US and the ongoing violence and political turmoil within Libya itself. Tourist visas are rarely issued, and when possible, entry is generally limited to specific purposes such as business or diplomatic reasons, requiring an official invitation from a Libyan entity. The situation in Libya remains volatile, with security conditions unpredictable and the potential for violence high, making it one of the most challenging countries for American tourists to visit. Next, we find Syria in the 8th spot. The ongoing Syrian civil war has devastated this historically rich nation, discouraging travel due to dangers like terrorism and kidnapping. The US Department of State routinely issues travel warnings for Syria, citing extreme risks of terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, and armed conflict, primarily as a result of the ongoing Syrian civil war that began in 2011. This war has not only devastated the country, but also severely strained Syria-US relations, leading to sanctions and diplomatic measures that further complicate travel. The presence of various armed groups, including ISIS and other terrorist organizations, poses a direct threat to foreigners, including Americans. Moreover, the US government's ability to provide consular assistance in Syria is extremely limited due to the suspension of US embassy operations in Damascus in 2012, leaving citizens without support in emergencies. Legal entry into Syria for Americans is fraught with bureaucratic hurdles, requiring a visa that is difficult to obtain, especially since the application must often be made through Syrian embassies in third countries due to the absence of diplomatic relations. Despite its rich cultural heritage and historical significance, the risks and legal barriers make Syria one of the most inaccessible countries for American travelers. Seventh place goes to Turkmenistan, a country famous for its door-to-hell gas crater and a rich tapestry of desert landscapes and archaeological sites. Americans, along with other foreigners, often find Turkmenistan a challenging country to visit, not due to a specific prohibition, but because of the nation's stringent visa and travel regulations, which are reflective of its isolated stance and autocratic government. The country's visa process is notoriously complex, requiring an invitation letter that is typically arranged through a registered Turkmen travel agency, a hurdle that can deter potential visitors. Turkmenistan's government, keen on controlling foreign influence and maintaining a tight grip on societal narratives, imposes these regulations to monitor and limit the presence and movement of foreigners within its borders. Additionally, once in Turkmenistan, travelers are usually required to be part of an official tour, further limiting independent exploration and interaction with local life and culture. This cautious relationship reflects in the travel advisories issued by the U.S. Department of State, highlighting the bureaucratic hurdles and advising travelers on the need for thorough preparation. The requirement for a letter of invitation and a visa application processed through an embassy can take several weeks with no guarantee of approval, indicating the country's general wariness towards foreign visitors. Independent travel is nearly impossible, as most tourists must book their visit through a government-approved tour, except for those on a transit visa, which still requires a detailed itinerary and is often difficult to obtain. Despite these challenges, Turkmenistan's unique attractions, like the door-to-hell gas crater, ancient ruins, and striking modern architecture, offer a compelling reason for the intrepid traveler to navigate the bureaucratic maze. Saudi Arabia lands at number 6. Contrary to common misconceptions, Americans are allowed to visit Saudi Arabia, and the kingdom has significantly liberalized its visa policies in recent years to encourage tourism and diversify its economy beyond oil as part of its Vision 2030 initiative. In 2019, Saudi Arabia introduced an e-visa system for tourists, including Americans, making it easier than ever to explore the country. However, it's important to note that while tourism is encouraged, visitors are expected to respect local customs, laws and dress codes, reflecting the country's conservative Islamic culture. Women travelers, for instance, faced stricter regulations in the past, but reforms have eased these restrictions, though they are still advised to dress modestly. The US and Saudi Arabia have had complex diplomatic relations, influenced by geopolitical and energy interests, but tourism has generally not been impacted by these dynamics. Safety concerns due to regional tensions and the potential for terrorist attacks have prompted travel advisories, but these do not amount to Americans being unwelcome. Overall, while cultural differences and regional security issues require travelers to be mindful and respectful, Americans can and do travel to Saudi Arabia, experiencing its rich history, culture and natural beauty under the new tourist visa scheme. Halfway through on our list at number 5 is Eritrea, often called the North Korea of Africa due to its isolated regime and strict governance. Eritrea, often described as the North Korea of Africa due to its reclusive stance and strict government, presents significant challenges for American visitors, stemming largely from political isolation and human rights concerns. The relationship between the United States and Eritrea has been tense, with the US criticizing Eritrea's human rights record and its lack of political freedom, which has led to strained diplomatic interactions. These tensions are reflected in the difficulties Americans face when applying for a visa, a process that is notorious for its unpredictability and arbitrariness, even when all required documentation is provided. Furthermore, the Eritrean government imposes restrictions on travel within the country, requiring foreign visitors to obtain special permits for travel outside the capital Asmara, which can be a cumbersome and uncertain process. Eritrea's stringent control over tourism and foreign visitors is part of its broader approach to governance, prioritizing national security and self-reliance over international engagement. This approach has led to a general wariness towards Westerners, including Americans, potentially impacting the level of welcome they might feel while in the country. Despite these challenges, those who manage to visit Eritrea often speak of its unique charm and the beauty of its untouched landscapes, illustrating the complex nature of travel to this isolated nation. The relationship between Cuba and the United States has been historically complex, marked by decades of political tension and economic sanctions, primarily due to ideological differences dating back to the Cold War era. The U.S. embargo, established in the early 1960s, significantly restricts American citizens from engaging in tourism and trade with Cuba, aiming to pressure the Cuban government towards democratization and respect for human rights. The U.S. government requires Americans traveling to Cuba to fall under one of 12 authorized categories, but purely tourist visits are not among these exceptions. Cuban-American relations saw a brief period of thawing, with eased travel restrictions under the Obama administration, but subsequent administrations have reinstated stricter measures reflecting ongoing diplomatic challenges. Consequently, Americans wishing to visit Cuba must navigate a complex set of regulations, with the overarching U.S. policy continuing to discourage casual tourism and limit direct economic support to the Cuban government. Americans, like other foreign tourists, are not specifically unwelcome in Bhutan. Rather, the country has a unique tourism policy that applies to all visitors to protect its culture and environment. Known as high-value, low-impact tourism, Bhutan requires all tourists, including Americans, to pay a daily fee that covers accommodation, meals, a licensed tour guide, and a contribution to sustainable development. This fee, ranging from $200 to $250 per day depending on the season, aims to limit the number of visitors to ensure that tourism does not negatively affect the country's natural and cultural heritage. The policy reflects Bhutan's commitment to preserving its Buddhist traditions and pristine environment while sharing its culture with visitors in a sustainable way. While this might seem restrictive, it ensures that all tourists contribute positively to the nation's economy and the preservation of its unique way of life. Thus, Americans are welcome in Bhutan, provided they adhere to the country's tourism policies designed to benefit both visitors and the local Bhutanese communities. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been fraught with tension since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which dramatically shifted the diplomatic and political ties between the two countries. This historical backdrop has led to a complex situation for American travelers, with Iran often viewed as unwelcoming to U.S. citizens due to political animosity and mutual distrust. The U.S. has imposed a series of sanctions on Iran related to its nuclear program and regional activities, contributing to the strained relations. As a result, travel to Iran for Americans is highly regulated, requiring them to join guided tours and obtain special authorization, making spontaneous travel and exploration nearly impossible. The Iranian government's suspicion towards American visitors can lead to scrutiny and the potential for detention, adding a layer of risk for U.S. nationals. Despite the rich cultural heritage and historic sites that Iran offers, these diplomatic and security concerns significantly limit the accessibility and appeal of Iran as a travel destination for Americans. Travel by Americans to North Korea is fraught with significant risks and legal restrictions, largely due to the long-standing political and military tensions between the two countries. The U.S. government has imposed a travel ban that prohibits American citizens from using their passports to enter North Korea, with exceptions granted only under specific circumstances, such as for certain humanitarian or journalistic activities. The diplomatic rift, absence of a U.S. embassy in North Korea, and the potential for escalation of diplomatic conflicts further discourage travel, leaving no safety net for American travelers in case of emergencies. These factors combine to make travel to North Korea not only dangerous, but also legally challenging for Americans, underscoring the deep divide and mutual suspicion that characterize US-North Korean relations. That wraps up our tour of the top 10 countries where Americans are better not to travel in 2024. Make sure you watch these videos too.